We are at 10, actually, my time it's 10:01, but on the East Coast it's
12:01.
afternoon now, so it's time for us to get started with today's United Church of Christ Musicians Association Saturday Sharing. I'm Amanda Udis-Kessler, a hymn writer, sacred music composer, church musician, and I serve on the UCCMA Board of Directors as Director of DEI and Member Education, which means I have the delight of organizing and facilitating these Saturday sharing sessions. Before we get started with today's, I'm just going to make two quick announcements. They may get a little reinforcement later. First, our next Saturday sharing is on May 30th, also at noon East Coast time. That is Improving Congregational Singing Best Practices with Brian Hain from the Hymn Society's Center for Congregational Song. The registration for that, it's also free, and the registration for it is already up on the uccma.org website. And of course, I must announce the UCCMA National Biennial Conference, which is coming up this summer. It will be held from July 8th to 11th at the First Community Church North Campus, Columbus, Ohio. It's got a fabulous roster of people and should be a great time. The early bird registration deadline for that is May 15th, so you still have a little time to get a slightly cheaper price break if you are interested in going. For information about these and all other things, UCC Musicians Association, go to uccma.org and look us up. And with that, I'm happy to turn to today's topic. We are talking today with the UCCMA president and a longtime distinguished minister of music, Eric Dundore. And I will ask Eric to briefly introduce himself and briefly introduce today's session before we get going with the questions.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And you can't really believe all the wonderful things that Amanda does for the UCCMA. She's been such a shot in the arm for us, and we're so grateful that she uh, is on our team. It's a great thing. Thank you all for coming today. I am the president of UCCMA after being the editor of the UCCMA Journal for 6 years. Um, they said enough of that, be president instead, and so I am. Um, it's a great organization to be a part of, and I would encourage you to get involved as much as possible. Enough commercial on that. I have been the minister of music here at St. Paul's United Church of Christ in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, South Central Pennsylvania. I'm in my 45th year of doing that. And good Lord, it seems like just yesterday when we started, but it's been 45 years. I have an adult choir, a youth choir that I conduct. We have hand chimes. We have a little kids choir. We have two organists, and so we have a congregation that really values music, and I'm very fortunate. I'm a retired high school choral director as well, and do a lot of work in the community and community theater and directing and music directing shows and that kind of thing too. So that's my background. And I'm really glad to give you whatever information I can come up with. Although I'm sure there are many of you here today that have just as much experience and wonderful things to contribute as well. So that's why we're here, to network and talk and see what we can do to help each other out.
Okay, so we'll get started with the questions. In your long distinguished career, what are some of the most challenging church music staff relations situations that you have experienced, and how have you addressed them?
Well, I've been very fortunate in that we haven't had much trauma here at our church when it comes to relationships and, sometimes the dramatic things that happen in congregations. Um, Filling vacancies is always a traumatic thing to have to deal with. And I found that, trying to find people from within the congregation is your best bet at that point. Finding people who are then within your own community, who know your congregation or who know of your church is always a good thing. And then working with other organizations to help you find persons who can fill vacancies in your music staff is the way to go. It's not always the easiest thing in the world. And I know that from personal experience because I'm retiring here at the end of June from this position, and they're having a difficult time finding somebody who wants to follow me. So, that can always be traumatic. Changing, of course, of pastoral leadership, transition to new pastors, I've done a few times, and it's something that has to be handled carefully, and it takes long and detailed discussions with a new pastor to make those kinds of transitions work, so that we understand, so that everybody understands backgrounds and perspectives and traditions that come from both sides of that new relationship. So it just takes a lot of talking and getting used to and setting of boundaries and duties and that kind of thing. Recently, well, within the last 10 years, our church consistory forced us to do staff evaluations. That was a little traumatic, especially when people hear that they're going to be evaluated for what they do. So we handled that by making sure that everybody understood why we were doing it or why it was being done, and how we can make this into a very positive thing. We had a prolonged illness at one point of our organist, and that was a bit traumatic. That was a bit of a difficulty, the challenge of finding people to substitute and to, maintain what we had been doing, but also making sure that our organist knew that she was welcomed back with open arms when she returned, and that we were not going to replace her just because she had an illness of some sort. I also ended up in the 90s having to chair the committee on finding a new hymnal, and that was certainly a challenge. I don't know if any of you have gone through that at all, especially when of course, on the initiation of the New Century hymnal was when we started doing that and moving from that red hymnal, that awful red UCC hymnal, to the New Century. But we did look at other hymnals, the Pilgrim hymnal and the Chalice hymnal, and a few other things. And we studied it for over a year and talked about it in Sunday school classes and in worship committee meetings and that kind of thing to figure out what would be the best way to go. And then we did decide to go with the New Century and took it to the congregation for a vote and all that kind of thing. And so that was a bit of a challenge for our congregation to deal with. And we did lose a few people over the New Century hymnal figures, but we also gained some people from having a hymnal that was a little more inclusive and open and welcoming. So those were some of the main things that we've had to deal with over the years. I don't know if that has any conjunction with what you're doing, but there it is.
Well, and we will have, I imagine, some time for questions and conversation at the end. So people can sort of come back to anything that strikes their interest or that seems relevant.
If they want to ask things now, I don't have a problem with that. That's while we're still talking on a specific topic.
Oh, sure.
If you want to do it that way, I don't care. Just don't feel like you have to sit there and listen through all this boring
Well,
minutia.
I will definitely keep an eye on the screen. If someone who has their video off wants to talk, though, they may need to just unmute and interrupt me. And Michael, we're happy to see your cat. I just had to throw mine down. Um, so you've begun to answer this question, I think, but I'll ask it anyway. Beyond what you've already said, what are the most important lessons that you've learned about how to keep church music staff relations productive, kind, and creative?
Well, of course, we're in a job where relationships are of the utmost importance. Relationships with your staff, relationships with your volunteer musicians, relationships with pastors and other church staff and the congregation members individually and collectively. It's very important to be able to do that smoothly and in a caring and respectful manner. And so you really have to be much more interested in the person than in the job, or the responsibility. The person is of tantamount importance here. You want to be as honest as possible with people, but you also want to be caring and concerned and make sure that you have their best interests at heart. Sometimes that can be a little difficult, trying to get something to improve or change, when that doesn't want to happen. Talking through and planning any change that might occur, how things could work differently, take some real discussion and understanding that people don't make those changes very easily, and demonstrating that this is how we could do it, and working through it in a caring manner is just what's important there, I think. So.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit before some of the tasks that come with getting things going with a new pastor. Beyond that particular scenario, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that church musicians face on the staff relations front, specific to working with pastors, whether they are new or not?
Right. Well, understanding where that pastor is coming from. Um, we here in Pennsylvania are very much Reformed, German Reformed type people. And people in New England tend to be congregational type people. And, there's some practices and traditions that don't align in those two traditions. And so it can be very difficult if you're making that transition between those two kinds of theology. But talking through it and understanding what has been done in the past, what has worked, what hasn't worked, that kind of thing is very important. Knowing boundaries, how am I going to say who has musical jurisdiction? You know what I'm saying? Who's going to pick the hymns? What is the general tenor of the service, of the worship service? What are we going for here? What do you expect when it comes to styles and genres of music? How do you feel about instruments or what's your thought on contemporary versus traditional, or that kind of thing? So having that understanding with your pastor so that we don't get into bumping heads over those basic thoughts, and getting those things clear right from the start, I think is really important. Some pastors have a major musical background and are very good with music and insist on picking hymns and responses and all that kind of stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, I've always been the person who's done that here, and I enjoy doing that, and aligning the music with the theological sentiment of the service and making that happen. And I think I have more resources than my pastor does when it comes to making those decisions. So it just varies from place to place and person to person. Um, but the important thing is to keep the lines of communication open and flowing and frequent. Talk about things that need to be done. Talk about why you agree or why you don't agree, or how this could be different, or sharing resources, or whatever it happens to be, so that you don't uh, start having battles over things. No one wants a holy war in a church.
This actually reminds me of an experience I had when I was serving in a church musician capacity in a different situation than I'm in now. This is years ago. But it was a congregation where the pastor had been a music teacher before going to seminary and was a fine musician. And we were working on a Blue Christmas service. So I'm bringing this up because I'm going to follow it up with a question I didn't prepare for you, but that's occurring to me now, which is kind of how you handle circumstances when there is an out of the box worship context that's not kind of the normal Sunday. And what happened in this case was we were preparing this and we were butting heads a lot, and I was trying to read the room to understand what was going on. And eventually I realized she thought she was music directing the service. I thought I was music directing the service. And so the right thing to do in that instance was for me to step back and just, be the accompanist and I had to sort of figure out how to articulate what I thought was going on, but it was done in time to sort of salvage things. But do you feel that worship outside of kind of standard Sunday services brings any kind of special issues or awareness needs or anything, or is it just an extension of the same in your background?
Well, it should be an extension of the same relationship and the same theology and so forth. But it can add a certain amount of drama to things, because it's outside of your box, your prepared box. We did a community pride service last summer at our church, um, and had hundreds of people in uh, who have different traditions, from Christians to Jews to Muslims to Hindu to whatever, and it was a very interesting conversation to prepare and plan, and the expectations from these different parties were got a little messy, but it was fun, and it ended up being a good thing, and finding the right music to sing and finding the right words to say and all that kind of thing, always interesting. But communication is the key, making everything plain and honest and simple as possible.
Sure. So we've talked just a little bit about pastors. Are there different challenges that church musicians face when working with church staff other than pastors?
Well, if you're working with your own church musicians who you are overseeing in some way, shape, or form, it's really important, again, to keep those lines of communication flowing. You should always know what it is um, that your colleagues are doing, and be a part of it and collaborate as much as possible and so forth. When it comes to things like the sexton or the church administrator or whatever it happens to be, or the consistory or church president or whatever, just making sure that everybody knows what their duties are, where their lane is, so that we know who is going to take care of this or that or the other thing. Specifically, you do this and I'll do this, and together we'll all meet, and it'll work out just fine. Meeting deadlines, I think, is a major importance. I know that there are a number I know, well, my church administrator wants to make sure that she gets everything on time so she can get things out in time. And, she has a newsletter and this and that and the other thing. So it has to be done in a timely way. And she really appreciates when everything is prepared. And being transparent about what it is that we do and why it is that we do it, I think is really being able to express, well, we sang that hymn. If somebody comes to you and says, well, that was strange, what did you do that for? Well, we did that because here's the reason, or why is it that you didn't wear choir robes this Sunday, but you did, or whatever it happens to be, something out of the ordinary, be able to explain why it is and don't get offended just because people question what it is that you do. So.
So this inspires another question that I did not send ahead of time. Um, in the focus on good communication, it also sounds like you're saying that having certain practices or processes that are kind of formalized and set up about how communication happens or how the tasks are shared or things like that. That having kind of a real structure in place facilitates all the other stuff going well. Do you have structures like that at your congregation? And if so, do they help with the sort of communication and relationship management?
Well, yeah, I think it's really important that everybody have a certain expectation of what it is that's going to happen and how it's going to go forward and all that kind of thing. And I'm a preparation kind of guy. I like to know what's happening and when it's going to happen and how it's going to work and all that kind of stuff. And to the point where I need to write things down and I need to, all that kind of thing. But we also have a worship committee that meets every other month to talk about all the aspects, any aspect of things that has to do with worship in the congregation, and it consists of pastors and music people and person who's in charge of the nursery, and the chancel committee, people who do the candles and the paraments and all that kind of stuff, and anybody else who's just and someone from our consistory is a representative as well. But anybody who has any interest in what we're doing on a Sunday morning or on special occasions anywhere else in the worship service. And I think it's really important that you get together and talk about those things in advance, bring up any issues that might be bothering people. A couple of years ago, we had to redo the whole deal with altar flowers. Oh my gosh, this was such a thing. Altar flowers had, and so we worked it out and it worked out fine. We've gone through wedding guidelines and we've gone through funeral guidelines and forms and procedures and all kinds of different things as to make everybody as comfortable as possible for whatever happens on a Sunday morning. And so it's really important that you have that kind of group that meets to discuss, and that it's not just a top-down pastoral decision or music director decision on everything that happens. It's nice to be able to share those discussions and decision-making possibilities. We also then have what we call a creative worship planning team. And this planning team here meets once a month toward the beginning of the month to talk about the real specifics of what we're doing in the service, what we're doing visually, what we're doing musically, what we're doing with the congregation, expectations, and so forth. All kinds of things that we plan. We just met. Well, actually, we're going to meet next week. We meet next week to talk about, going forward into May and June and into the summer as to what we need to look forward to. And we do the specific planning of worship. And that involves, again, pastors and myself and my children's choir director, who happens to be my wife, and um, and a retired pastor who's very much interested in that kind of thing, who takes care of a lot of the visuals, the decoration on the altar table and that kind of thing. So in any event, I found these things very helpful, um, and it doesn't put all the onus on me or all the onus on a pastor. It's a shared thing, and the amount of creativity that comes through that is really quite amazing. A gentleman who was on that committee when we first started it wrote a journal article back in the fall of 22 that you can go online at our website and read about how we got that started and what its purposes are and all that kind of thing. If you're ever interested in that, my friend Brian, he's a great guy, and he wrote the article for us. So I think that's pretty much it for that answer.
Well, it does raise one question for me, which is, do you have these basically two different kind of worship teams, is what it sounds like. Do they interact with each other?
Well, the creative worship planning team is basically a subcommittee of the worship committee. It's basically the same people, but we don't want to bog down this every other month worship committee meeting with the minutia of, well, what are we going to do in this service and what are we going to, that kind of thing. And they've found that that's a good thing. They can make the big decisions, and the small grouper can make the more detailed decisions that have to happen. Yeah.
Okay, beyond the things you've already said, what do you think the best practices are for music directors who are managing multiple staff musicians? We'll get to the volunteers in a minute, but
Yeah. Well, again, I think that we've talked a lot about, communication, making sure that everybody's on board with things, knowing what everybody else is doing on your staff. I am the one who plans what happens in every worship service, and so I'm the one who wants to go and check and make sure that everybody's okay with this Sunday or that Sunday or this piece of music, or whatever it happens to be. The directors, of course, pick their own music, but they need to know what's happening when it comes to theology and the lectionary and all that kind of stuff. And so we keep those going. They know they can come to me if there are any problems, or we had to have the piano retuned the other week because it went out of tune real fast, so we did that. And just keeping in contact so that we know what the needs are and what the if there are any problems that are coming up, or so and so. Sometimes I find out from the staff that so and so is sick, or so and so is having difficulties in school, or so, and whatever it happens to be. Sharing those kinds of things as well. And if we see that there are any difficulties when it's coming to relationships or health or well-being or any of that kind of thing, then we can sit down and talk, and you're doing okay, ask if they're doing okay, and see if there's anything that we can do for each other, or can I run the rehearsal if you're going to be out of town, or can, whatever it happens to be. It's just a mutual support of each other in situations where it needs that.
so it sounds like, your personal wisdom and insight and your years of doing this have really equipped you well to have a good sense of what kind of things need doing and how to do them. Beyond that, are there any particular resources, kind of out in the world resources, that you recommend for church musicians to equip them to better deal specifically with the staff relations side of this? Books, podcasts, journal articles, other resources of that sort.
Well, obviously, I'm going to say, yeah, the UCCMA is the best resource that you can have, but That's just because, there it is. Um, and my buddy Jeff Clauser, who's on the call here, has written a few really wonderful articles for us for our UCCMA journal. I have to check this. One was in the summer of 2018, and one was in the fall of 2020. Both those articles have many resources listed in them. And Jeff's a wonderful church musician and person who has really given a lot of thought and concentration and study to how music programs run and the theology of things, and is now working on is now a seminary student, right, Jeff? Exactly.
Yes,
What a guy.
seminary student again. So this will be my second seminary go around. So my previous degree was in church music from seminary. Now I'm in the MDiv program.
Right. And so his experience that he wrote into these two articles, again, summer of 18 and fall of 2020, are really quite wonderful. And there are other articles in the journal that are accessed on the website in the index. If you're a member, if you're not a member, go get a 90-day membership, free 90-day membership, and make it happen. Yes. And then you can go in and see those kinds of things. They really have a lot of wonderful stuff. There's a communication relationship section of that index that has a lot of good things. He mentioned a book that I then read, which is really good. Eileen Gunther's book, Rivals or a Team, Clergy and Musician Relationships in the 21st Century. Eileen Gunther, I think, was in Washington, D.C. as a church musician. But anyway, it's a great book. Rivals or a Team, it's called. And talks a lot about relationships and making things work in dramatic or traumatic, negative, bad situations, whatever it happens to be. There's also, American Choral Directors Association, the ACDA. They did a recent whole issue on collaborative relationships, which is really quite wonderful. The AGO has many articles on organists working with pastors and music directors and, those kinds of things. Any of those kinds of professional journals. There are a lot of things online as well. If you just go into Yahoo or Bing or Google or whatever it happens to be, and talk about church management or that kind of thing. So I won't presume to give you all kinds of titles, but there's so much stuff out there, and there are also people in the UCCMA and in your area who would be happy to network with you and talk with you about things.
And just one little thing, since you used initials, tell us what AGO stands
Oh,
for.
sorry, American Guild of Organists. My fault.
Well, no worries. Just probably everyone knows that, but it never hurts to specify it.
Yep.
So we then move from staff relations to relations with volunteer musicians. And for many of us in smaller congregations, such as mine, we may not have any paid staff musicians, but we do rely on volunteers. In my case, I'm actually both the pastor and the church musician at this point, which is interesting, but there are some other people who provide some music. And so I do think a lot these days about the nature of my relationships with them. Let me ask, in your case, what you have found to be the biggest challenges in working with volunteer musicians and how you address those challenges.
Well, again, I've been fortunate because I'm in a church that has always valued music greatly. And when I got there, they had a decent choir, not a huge choir, but it was a good group, and they enjoyed singing. And the congregation has always been spirited singers, and we've always had an organist that liked to play stuff, and piano and organ duets and instrumental soloists and all those kinds of things. So we've we were fortunate in that regard. However, of course, everybody has problems with scheduling and availability of their volunteer people. And they can't do this anthem because only 3 people showed up that Sunday, and they can't, this and that and the other thing. And I totally understand that. I'm blessed with a large group. I found that doing a half-year schedule, September to January, and then January to June, with all the dates and services and what we will be singing that day, or what the hand chimes or the youth choir or the little kids choir will be performing that day, having that set out in blocks like that is really quite helpful. People plan their vacations, plan their whatever around that kind of thing, because they really do want to be around to sing in the worship service and present pieces of music that they enjoy singing. Finding those pieces of music that they enjoy singing is a challenge as well. Sometimes you think you like a piece and you choose it, and they're not so sure about that. But if you approach it correctly, they'll jump on board, and things that they didn't like early on, they grow to love sometimes. And sometimes you make mistakes and you pick the wrong thing altogether. And then they tell you about that too. So people not being at rehearsal, the rehearsal right before a Sunday. I know that some music people, don't allow people to sing on a Sunday morning if they're not there on Wednesday night or Thursday night or whatever it happens to be. Well, I find that ridiculous, but personally, because we've been rehearsing things long enough in advance that shouldn't be a problem. So, let your people sing, for God's sake. Even if it doesn't sound especially great, let them have the experience. That's what we're there for. We're not there to be the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. We're there to be in service to the congregation, to your choir, and to the greater glory. So it's important to let people sing. Don't be so strict about rules. I have a saying that comes up sometimes in our choir rehearsals or in music in general. People get very, very set in their ways about things, and they don't want to change, and they don't want to. Why aren't we wearing robes this Sunday? Or why aren't we using our folders, our black folders? Or why aren't we playing, whatever it happens to be? Why aren't we doing the palms on Palm Sunday? Why aren't we? And I say, sometimes it just doesn't matter. It's okay. You don't have to do everything the same all the time. Just be calm and let it happen. Just go with the flow. You know what I'm saying? Don't get so uptight about things that it becomes a problem. So I haven't had a lot of the problems that other churches might have had. I do have empathy for those problems, however, and we're going to address those as much as possible in the future.
So I need to throw in a new question based on something you said almost as a throwaway, but I wonder if other people in the gathering were struck by this as I was. You basically plan your music seasons in 5 to 6 month blocks ahead of time. Is
Yeah.
that something you inherited? Is that something you instituted? If a congregation has not been doing that but wishes to sort of move in that direction, what advice would you give them on that kind of planning?
Well, again, I think it's really important that people have something that's predictable, something that they can count on, that's reliable, and having a schedule planned out in advance is one of those things. They want to go out of town for Thanksgiving. When's the Thanksgiving service? When are we going to sing this piece? When are we going to do the big Christmas cantata? When are we going to, what's happening for Worldwide Communion Sunday? What's happening for Pentecost? What are we using brass at Easter? What are we doing? Is this when when during the month, every month my hand chimes play one of the services a month. And which service is it going to be? Well, it's usually for us, it's usually the third Sunday of each month. And the youth choir usually sings one of the Sundays each month, depending on what the church calendar and so forth. It's just important so that people can plan and people can make this a deal in their lives so that they can be a part of something that they do with people that they enjoy being with. And you'll find that over the course of time, it becomes more important to do that because they really count on that. And I would say I would recommend doing that as much as possible, and not just going week to week or month to month, but giving people, showing people that you are really thinking about them and their needs as well. Does that make sense? I mean, I sit in August and plan most of the year, and then I put out September through January, the beginning of January through Epiphany, and then in December I plan then January through the rest of the year. And do we make changes along the way? Yeah, sometimes, but in general, they know exactly when these things are going to happen, and I just think it's important in people's lives that they have that. It's the least we can do.
And I'm going to just observe that Jeffrey's put a couple of resources in the chat. So everyone, if you have not been monitoring the chat, there isn't much chatting going on, but again, there are some resources for you all to look at. I at least have been able to kind of open links in a chat and set up a separate window, even in the middle of a Zoom, and it doesn't interrupt anything. So if anyone is feeling like kind of doing that while we're continuing to talk, please feel free. That's great. All right, so we have one more question, Eric, for you, and then if other people have questions or want to talk about their own experiences, struggles, best practices, that's fine. That's what we're here for, to share resources and ideas. And so this last question, we've kind of talked around this a little bit, but church musicians may be in congregations ranging from tiny to literally hundreds of people. So what are some of the opportunities and challenges that churches, I mean, I know that some of the answers of this are really obvious, but it never hurts to name and articulate them. So what are the opportunities and challenges in churches of different sizes? And while we're at it, where does your congregation fall on the size spectrum?
Well, having had this question ahead of time, I looked it up, and there are currently 50% of the UCC congregations have under 100 members. And 76% are under 200 members. So that's less than a quarter of the churches that are above 200 members. Weekly attendance, of course, is even less, depending on how you calculate your membership. It would be really wonderful if we knew the percentages of churches that have no church musician or only one church musician to serve that congregation. That's a challenge. That's a major challenge. How does congregational worship thrive when you have no real staff, church music staff, or only one person to make that whole program work? God bless those people. They're wonderful people, a wonderful congregation. Recently, I've been speaking with the STAR Coalition of the United Church of Christ about, I don't know if you know that group. The STAR stands for small town and rural congregations, who tend to be the smaller groups of UCC worshipers. And we've been talking about what we can do to serve going forward, because there are obvious musical needs for smaller congregations. The larger congregations don't seem to be having as many difficulties with finding musicians and finding volunteers and that kind of thing. Not that it doesn't happen, I'm not saying that. And there are small churches who are thriving musically, doing absolutely wonderful things. So I can't generalize, but in this case, the STAR Coalition and the UCCMA are now talking about what we can do, what are best practices for smaller congregations without a church musician. What are the resources and networking, and what can we do, our group, to support these congregations? And so we're compiling as much information as we can, and over the course of the next year, we'll try and get all these kinds of things up and onto our website so that we can serve those churches that need assistance and need guidance and direction. I think that's really important. Yeah, it's great to talk about anthems that are in SATB with Divisi and cello accompaniment and all that kind of stuff. That's a wonderful thing, and we can talk about all those wonderful high and lofty things. Those churches don't need our help as much as the ones that are struggling to find their musical footing. And so that's what we're gonna be working on. You know, music, of course, is really important to the success and the lifeblood of any congregation. And so getting information and important stuff out to those people are really important. I am fortunate enough to serve a congregation that is at about 360 right now. And so, you know, when I talk to the STAR people, I was on their Zoom call with their board, and I've talked with conference ministers in northern Wyoming and Montana, and churches that are in the Pacific Northwest and other places that are having difficulty with attendance or finding church musicians. I feel very guilty about that sometimes, but because I don't always have a grip on what's the best thing to do for those churches. And so we're making an all call on what are best practices, what works for you, what has worked in the past, and what can we pass on to other people that will really help them to become more energetic and thriving in their worship musically. So that's the best I can do at this point without getting overly specific.
And I'll throw in that for those of you who do read the UCCMA journal, I have an essay coming out in the next issue on how STAR congregations, small town and rural congregations, can use the whole paradigm of new texts to old tunes to invigorate or revitalize their music. It sounds very simple, but when I think about it, for me, it really does feel like a kind of game changer and a way to, and
Right.
I write a little bit about this in the piece, but it does seem to me like a way that a congregation that needs both comfort and some draw into the future, that the kind of the new text to old tune strategy is a very straightforward way of kind of trying to bring those things together. So
Right.
I'm hoping that plenty of people other than me have been thinking about that and figuring out how to do it because
Well, again, one of those suggestions, you know, some churches who are small and are singing a cappella or singing with a recording of an organ playing, and they like to sing Amazing Grace or Nettleton or Aurelia or you know whatever it had, Rock of Ages or whatever, but they don't want to sing the same words every week. There are people like Amanda and Carolyn Winfrey Gillette, and you know a lot of people who are out there writing alternative words to existing hymn tunes that can really make a difference. We use these all the time. In fact, Holy One, Gather Us In is going to be our introit tomorrow morning at St. Paul's, and I wanted to get that in because Amanda is one of our favorite people here at this church.
oh,
Um,
thank you. All right, so we only have a few minutes left. Do people have questions, comments, contributions to make? Let's open this up. Joan, go ahead.
I just additional resources, some specific ways that UCCMA can be helpful to you. We have a chaplain who's willing to talk to you if you're butting heads with somebody on your staff or your choir or whatever. And you're just like, woo, he's willing to talk to you. He won't solve your problems, but just help you get a perspective. He has talked to some people already. Secondly, my husband retired last year from a very long term in his church, 60 years. And he can't tell them how to hire or who to hire for the next person, but for them to get some help on how to search for a musician, he did tell the pastor that she could talk to a former president of ours, Greg Chestnut, who's down in Florida, and to get really objective information about how to, do the transition. He himself had recently retired from his church. And so I think she talked to him a couple times and he was very helpful. So if you need objectivity, you can contact Eric, and Eric could suggest a UCCA member to you or a former board member or president or himself. Objectivity can really help if you get another musician to look through your situation for you, especially if you're in a prickly situation. So those are my suggestions.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Anyone else? And again, I want to point out that there are a few resources in the chat, so please feel free to go in and grab them while the session is still going. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Michael, go ahead.
I just have a question about planning. I've been in situations where I could plan, 6 months ahead, and some where I didn't know the next Sunday was going to happen. And I'm just curious to know if your clergy sticks pretty close to the lectionary, because that makes a huge difference. Or in one case, we stuck to the lectionary, but then like once or twice a year, we would block out 4 or 6 Sundays for a certain theme, or maybe take a certain theme for Advent or Lent that was Lenten or Adventish, but not exactly Sunday by Sunday. How did you deal with that, and were your clergy helpful in that?
Well, we are a very much lectionary based congregation. The pastors usually go with the lectionary, and so we use the prepare book. I don't know if you know the prepare book that comes out to that backwards when I show it. But anyway, that gives you the lectionary for the week and suggested hymns and suggested anthems and visuals and all kinds of different things. It's a really wonderful resource. But we also, within the context of the worship committee, plan out in advance what's coming and what we might do that's special or different when it comes to church Sunday celebrations and things. So yeah, I think it's really important to delineate those things ahead of time so that we as music people can plan ahead. We can't just jump in and say, hey, this anthem fits for this coming Sunday. Let's just do it now. Okay, thank you. Ain't gonna work. But yeah, I agree, Michael. Anything else?
I can actually offer one really different example of a way that I and my little church, serving both as the pastor and the primary musician, worked with a volunteer musician for a while. He's kind of on his way out the door to another opportunity. But he was someone who had certain skills. They were quite limited. But in the area where he was gifted, he was gifted. And so what I was able to do was get him to basically do preludes and postludes every week. And so he provided a little bit of diversity in terms of seeing who was at the keyboard, and he had a lovely voice. And he and I would get together at a coffee shop, once a month or so, and I would basically talk about, I don't follow the lectionary, but I generally plan enough in advance to know what my themes are and what the scriptures are and so on. And so in his case, I would meet with him and I would say, so, here's the topic. What would you like to play? Any ideas? And, he'd rattle off a couple of ideas. I'd pick the one that was sort of closest to what we were doing. And, he was not sort of competent to accompany hymns. That wasn't his strength, but what he did well. And so we really just navigated, I was really clear about what was and wasn't going to be acceptable. And within that paradigm, I had to figure out, can I make a space for him? And in his case, preludes and postludes worked well. Again, he provided a little diversity at the keyboard and people really liked his energy. So I also encourage us to try to see the volunteers who show up in terms of their gifts and graces and understand their limits and not try to ask them to do things they can't, but try to figure out if there is a way to build in space for them to do what they can. I have, it's a very different situation than Eric's church. We have 20 to 30 on a kind of average Sunday, and around 50 members. So anyone who wants to do something, we want to figure out how to invite them. Eric, thanks for putting prepare in the chat. Again, there's a lot of great resources in the chat. We have time for maybe one more question or comment if anyone has one. Okay, Eric, would you like to close us out with any other thoughts or words related either to this topic or to the UCCMA more generally?
Why, certainly. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I would be more than happy to speak with any of you by phone, by email, by Zoom, anytime if you have any other specific things that you would want to bring up. But again, I would push next month's Saturday sharing with Brian Hain. He's a wonderful guy about singing in congregations. Couldn't get a better person to talk about it. Our summer conference in Columbus, Ohio. Oh my gosh, we're going to have such fun there. And right now, the registration is not overly abundant, but it's growing day by day, and hopefully we can get a lot of people to come out and be a part of the UCCMA family for those 4 days in July. Go online and check out what we have in the conference. We also have a Venmo account now, in case anybody thinks that what we're doing here today or anytime is useful and they want to reward us with a couple dollars. You can give to our Venmo account. I haven't done that yet. I don't know how to do that because I'm old and dumb, but we those of you who know how Venmo works can make that happen to the UCCMA. So that's available as well. My best wishes to all of you for what it is and for what it is that you do, but also my heartfelt thanks and congratulations for what it is that you do. You work very hard for the people that you serve, and we really, really appreciate what it is that you do for your congregations and how you make them feel. So thank you very much for your service.
And before we wrap up, Eric, I'm going to ask you to put your email address in the chat while we are all still going, so that if people want to get in touch with you, they can do so easily. I have put my email address in the chat. I've also put my free use progressive worship music website in the chat, and there's a link. So while we're all here, you can literally just click on it. It'll take you to the page, and you can look at it at some point. But Eric, since you were so kind as to invite people to contact you, we will there is your email address. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. We are about at time. I'm going to ask Joan to leave this open for another few seconds in case anyone is pulling things from the chat. But obviously, if you're ready to head out, please have a delightful day. Hope to see some of you on May 30th and with Brian Hain, and hope to see some of you at the conference in Columbus, Ohio, which is going to be absolutely spectacular. So feel free to head out, but feel free to pull things from the chat if you like. and have a
It is
lovely day,
recorded,
everyone.
by the way.
Hmm?
It's recorded, by the way, right?
That's right. This has been
People can
recorded.
look for it later
Joan,
too.
will the chat be available to people who watch this later?
Um, yeah, I get a copy of the chat, and I will put in the follow-up email. I'll put all those links in there too.
Oh, that's magnificent. Okay. So we know a bunch
Awesome.
of people signed up who weren't here today. That is pretty common for
Yeah.
us. But that means we'll wrap up now. But when you get the relevant resources, feel free to go back and take advantage of them. Have a joyous day, everyone.
Bye-bye.